Hi, this is Chris Haughey. Thank you for joining me on Create with Chris. It is summer and all I can say is hello beach. I love painting on the layered door hangers, but I always like to do that little something extra to make it look spectacular. So if you're interested in bringing up an ordinary door hanger to that wow factor level, stay tuned because we're going to turn this door hanger into something amazing. The beach hanger kit is 18 pieces and it is made of MDF. I do seal all the pieces with multi-purpose sealer, just ensures that the paint's going to adhere really well. Makes a nice coverage. I am base coating starting at the bottom with Laguna. It's a darkest color and it's still a really pretty beachy color. Using a 3/4 inch oval wash, it's a soft bristle brush. And I'm painting from the middle toward the outer edges. That will ensure that the edges stay nice and clean. I don't have to worry about drips running down the edges. I put it on rather thin, give it a quick dry, and then add a second coat. Each layer up is going to be just a little bit lighter in color. The middle section is Bahama Blue, which is another beautiful beachy color. This one I had to slow down a little bit because the piece is a little more narrow, so I had to be super careful about not getting drips down the side. But believe me, it's worth taking time to make sure that those edges stay nice and clean. Another factor that you need to keep in mind when putting pieces together, if there's paint on the side edges, it may not fit as well as if they were totally clean. This is Crystal Blue, the lightest color. And on all three of these pieces, I do actually, this is the beach color, which is almondine, but I put one coat on, let it dry, and then add a second coat, making sure that it is covered really well. The lighter the paint, just keep an eye on it, may need a second or third, even a third coat. I knew I wanted to add a little bit of a wave motion in the background, especially on this, the biggest piece, because it's most visible and it was dark and I just thought it needed jazzed up a little bit. I'm using my number 6 Spectacular stencil brush. If you've not tried my Spectacular stencil brushes, they are truly spectacular. Nice soft bristle. I load it with paint, wipe the excess off on a paper towel, and then gently dry brush. With the soft bristle, it's just going to provide just a really subtle, kind of quiet design. Did not want this to be extremely bold with all the other elements on top of it. Sometimes it just gets too crazy busy. So this will be just enough design to give that movement of flowing water. And this is the Flourish stencil, and I love it. It almost looks like a splash, the way those curls kind of go around. And I wasn't too particular about stencil placement. I kind of turned it, I looked at what part of the stencil that I like the best, like the big swirls and splashes, and it will blend together because of all the individual little elements there. So I wasn't too crazy particular about placement. I just wanted to make sure that I had nice design on the pieces, especially with these more narrow pieces. And I did go in, I think on one of these, and just add that little extra swirl all by itself, and it was kind of in a void area or an empty area. So the stencil doesn't meld together, but because it's just a fun design, it's going to look good no matter which way it's stenciled. I did go with a lighter Crystal Blue to stencil this middle area. Just gives a little bit of difference, but not a huge amount of crazy design. And you can see how I fit that on there. This is the top section. With my stencil brush, you can wash it out and use a different color and not have to worry about it, but because these colors were so close in the shades, I just wiped it out well on a paper towel. This is white. It was fine. I just wanted to make sure that the design was visible. I love how it turned out. I think that worked out really well. Now to create that little splash of wave on the beach, I just loaded the toe of my 1/2 inch awesome angle with Snow White, and it's just kind of a loose, almost a random up and down, and I blended it out to the edge just to look like water kind of washing up. Let this dry really well. Now I'm going in with raw sienna, and I'm floating on just a hint of color at the edge of the wave, and that's going to give a little bit of depth and dimension. And it's always these little bits of paint that make such a big difference. So, just kind of tucking that in. Again, I'm not too particularly careful because the water is so random and loose that the shading can also reflect that and not have to be just perfectly smooth and even. This is a sandy beach, so it doesn't have to be exact. Now, when the wave hits the shore, there's always that little bit of receding water from the previous wave that kind of washes out and comes back in. So this is that little bit of a second float that's just going to look like the water has been there previously and washing back, and this is another wave that's kind of washing up there. And I do the same thing, but because this is a much softer kind of or quieter wave, it's not as heavy as the other one, I'm just using a float of raw sienna, but it's almost like a hint of color so that you can see that difference between the two waves. Going back to reinforce that edge of the wave just to make it look a little frothy, a little foamy, a little bubbly. And this is Snow White. I'm letting that just be very loose, kind of float it toward the edge of the plaque. Water is so much fun because these choppy floats just add to the movement, and that's what we're going for here, just that loose. And I don't want any sharp edges. I just let it kind of float in, and it can be frothy. Loaded my Deerfoot stippler with Snow White, and I thought it should be foamy on the very edge, so I'm adding that little bit of stippling in there. And I found out if I really pounce my stippler on the palette, it spreads the bristles open even more. And you can see the ones I just did on the right, I like those a lot better. So I'm going back, and it looks almost like foam because it's just very loose and open, and I prefer that look to the solid pouncing that I was getting before. So I'm just tapping that on very randomly at the tip of the wave. I just really wanted to enhance that edge to make it look like there's a lot going on there. That water's just rolling in and getting ready to roll back in, and I think that works out perfectly. And I did fuss with it a little bit. I think that this little bit of paint makes such a huge difference, so I did play around with that a little bit. I thought that in addition to all of the foam and the couple waves, that it should have some little bit of splashes of water. So I loaded my splatter brush with thinned Snow White, just kind of letting that splatter, and then I thought, there's going to be some on the waves as well. So I put a small splattering, mostly at the edge of the water, but I did allow it to go back into the rest of the body of water as well. It's just those little details that really change the way things up here. These are the little bands on the life ring, and I'm painting those coral and the starfish. And I decided cosmetic sponge are great for pieces that have a lot of open areas, or that way it won't run down the side edges. That flat, I just put a minimal amount of paint on it and then tap it over very lightly. I don't have to worry about the edges. So I decided to do the same thing with a spouncer on the life ring. Wasn't really working out well for me, so I did go ahead and try it, but it left a lot of texture, and with the cosmetic sponge it was a little bit smoother and it didn't leave that texture. So I put one coat on, and then I think I went back with my brush to put the second coat on. The flip-flops, I decided to paint them green and coral, but after I started applying the coral, it dawned on me that it probably would be easier to paint the green sections because they're curved, and then if I went over the line, I could touch it up easier with the coral section. I am using my number 6 Fabulous Flat. If you haven't tried my flats and filberts, they are wonderful. The length of the bristle is quite a bit longer than a regular flat. That way I don't have to reload as often, and I can paint larger areas. I get smoother strokes, and my paint is just a little more even because I don't have to reload and blend it in as much. Same thing with all of the base coats. It's going to take 2 coats. I never try to get one heavy coat on. It just isn't worth it. You still have to go back and touch it up. So best results are 2 light, smooth coats. I did speed the video up just to kind of eliminate wait time between base coats and dry time, and kind of move it all along a little bit quicker. This is Green Tree, beautiful color. It's a very summer color. And it's kind of fun to work with these pieces that already have the lines on them and they're cut out. Oh my goodness, to not have to trace a pattern on and just to be able to jump in and start painting really cuts down the prep time, and the actual, painting time just goes a little bit quicker. It's fun. In my mind, I painted the sunglasses green, but actually when I started to paint them green, I realized that if I laid them on top of the flip-flops, they were going to blend in too much. So I kind of put that on hold while I was deciding what color I really wanted to paint them. And I just decided to paint the lenses while I'm thinking about it. And that is with Bahama Blue. Thought about painting them darker, but I didn't want them to be too much of a focal point. I just wanted to use the colors that I already had on my palette. Now I'm going in with my number 6 Fabulous Flat to paint the opposite stripes on the flip-flops and the sole around the outer edge with coral. And I found out the number 6 was just perfect to paint that stripe. So I, go with tools that make your painting less work. And you can see I can just do one stroke across. It's perfect edge to edge. This one stripe was a little bit wider, and all I did was press a little bit harder. I'm using my number 5 Radical Round to do the outer edge. Trying to be careful. I didn't want paint to run down the side edges. I prefer to keep those the original color. If you want, you can bring that color down. I think that would look great too. I think that's more of a personal preference. But I'm using the Radical Round. It has a really nice point on it. Makes it easy to get in those smaller areas and not have to work so hard. And I think that's what makes painting sometimes a challenge when something becomes tedious or difficult to deal with. And you can see I can take that brush and just go right around the edge. Top coating the coral stripes with Tea Berry. That's one of the newer Decor colors. Absolutely gorgeous. And over top of that coral, it just resonates summer. It's a beautiful combination. And I'm just using that number 6 flat to top coat that, and the Radical Round. It's just so easy when the brushes are the appropriate brushes for the areas being painted. And you can see I did paint the sunglasses green, but I changed my mind on that. And just bring that around. Things don't always turn out the way you think they should in your mind until you actually get them painted. So don't be afraid to experiment or try different things, because sometimes In my mind, the green looked fantastic, but after it was all said and done, I realized that was not the right color, and I ended up loving the yellow so much better. So don't be afraid to change your mind, customize something. These are those little bands on the life ring, and I did shade around the outer edge with tea berry just to bring that rich color in. And I'm using my handy helper. It has stars and hearts on it. If you don't have any of my painter's tools, boy, you're missing the boat, because this really makes all these small details, it just makes them perfect. And it's so easy to use. And I'm using Snow White just to stencil that in, using my spectacular stencil brush. I had to clean my stencil off because I couldn't see placement. So unless you know exactly where you're going to put it, the translucency of the painter's tools and any stencil is just a real bonus. I was afraid I was going to get paint in that other point of the star, so I just grabbed another one of my handy helpers and used that to mask it off. I just took a little bit of baby duck and lightened the top half of the starfish, and I'm using baby duck to add little dip dots on these flip-flops. And that's when I started thinking maybe I should make that sunglass rims this baby duck, because I love bringing that color in. I wasn't too particular about keeping all of the dots exactly spaced. I like that, you know, this is summertime when everything's kind of carefree and easygoing, so I decided to let my dip dots be a little bit carefree and easygoing, and I just kind of popped them in randomly. I used a stylus and I dip dotted about 3 before I reloaded, so there is a little variance in sizes, but I make sure I don't line them all up like little soldiers, so I kind of jump around with the dip dots so they're all different sizes. Taking a little bit of Bahama Blue, my 1/2 inch awesome angle, floating around the outer edge of the life ring and the ends. Just gives that little hint of color that kind of pulls everything together. And this is laying on the water, so it'll reflect that blue watercolor nicely. I thought the sandals needed to be brightened up a little bit, so I took a little bit of baby duck. This was kind of an experiment to see whether or not I wanted to brighten the stripes up with a little bit of that. I like the way it looks, so I thought that was a good choice. Just kind of the top and the left side, and decide as you get down to where they overlap. I changed my mind on the way they overlapped, and I switched my shading around. I didn't like the left one on top of the right one, so I switched it back. Getting ready to do the letters, and I used painter's tape, and I stretch it out and kind of roll it under so I can stick my letters down, because honestly, trying to hang on to those little letters will drive you crazy. It's just so nice to put that on there. They stay nicely in place and don't have to worry about messy fingers, drips down the edges. Using that cosmetic sponge again, very light touch. If you press really hard, it's going to drip down the side. No different than a brush. If you overload it, you're going to have a mess. So a little bit of paint makes a big difference. A light touch, just gently tap over it, let it dry, and give it a second coat. So much better than trying to clean up the edges. I did go back with tea berry on probably about the bottom third of the letters, and I didn't clean my cosmetic sponge, just wiped it off, jumped back into baby duck to kind of brighten the top half of it. And you can see it looks a little bit intense, but by the time it dries and you tap it down and tap it back, you want that bright sunshine look. If you're worried about it, just keep it a little bit lighter and then go back and add a second coat, but I wanted it to really glow. I did get into some of the tea berry, so I had to go back and kind of touch it up a little bit, bring that coral color back in. So, you know, it's not bad to jump back and forth. And with this cosmetic sponge, I did not wait for these to dry in between the layers, the tea berry and the baby duck, so it blends it together very nicely. Okay, back to baby duck on the sunglasses, and you'll notice in the center of the lenses I did dry brush Snow White, and I used my 5 radical round to dry that. If you can see in the background, I did put little dip dots on that green, and it just did not work. So probably had to put about 3 coats to cover that green up and the dip dots from underneath, but when it was finished, this was the perfect solution. Using my Epic script liner and Snow White, I'm just adding in some stronger reflection lines. I thought the sunglasses need to have a little more color with them. Shading with tea berry is absolutely beautiful. This really turned out nice and brings all those colors together. Using my 1/2 inch angle just to float, actually I'm using my 1/4 inch awesome angle. And I painted the toe straps on the flip-flops, the baby duck too, so they kind of match, or you know, go together. And I brought that tea berry float onto the straps. It was kind of hard to hold that and film it at the same time, but I shaded them on the outer sides and just a little bit across the end. I was thinking about how to decorate the glasses, so I'm using my painter's pal, my spectacular stencil brush, and tea berry just to add a few bigger dip dot or polka dots on the glasses, and just used another painter's pal to kind of cover that up so I don't get paint into the lens area. Just works really well to use those to help mask. And then I decided to do a green dot, but I didn't like that, so I went to a smaller size. It was too much of the same size polka dot that it just looked busy instead of interesting. While I was doing this, I was trying to decide in my mind how to kind of finish the glasses off. And after I stenciled on, and on these I just did 1 coat for the stencil. I didn't want them real heavy and dark. Decided to go in. I took my circle stencil and I went in with a number 3 micron, and I decided a number 5 worked better. And I'm just outlining those rims on the sunglasses. Gosh, that looks so much better. So then I decided to go back in and outline the dots, or the polka dots. So I stepped up the size of the circle stencil that I used so that I went next size up. And you can see it's just a little bit bigger, but because of the width of the pen, it makes it a perfect fit for the stenciled polka dot. Does that make sense? It just really works out well. The difference that having this line work on the sunglasses is huge, and oftentimes it's all the little touches that do make a big difference, but now they don't look unfinished, and it's just a very simple detail to add. And if you're using templates to help ensure that you're going to have perfect outlines, it's not a challenge, and it looks very professional. I just love how the pen work really finishes this off. So while I'm being amazed at what a difference the pen work made on the polka dots, in my mind I'm thinking, okay, maybe I need to add a little bit more line work on the rims. So I decided to just go ahead and start adding pen work. And this can be a little bit scary because you can't wipe pen work off like you can paint. And I thought, well, I'll just do a little bit and see how it looks. I like the way that looked. To me, it just adds a little more fun, a little more whimsy. So I decided if I do it on the glasses, maybe I should do it on the life ring. I did not want these to be perfect, so I'm just using random length dashes to kind of outline that. And it just adds that perfect touch. And I think I said earlier, don't be afraid to play around and try different things. To me, it was well worth it because it made such a big difference on the way it looked. And so I'm thinking, okay, so if it worked well for that, maybe it would work really well for the sandals or the flip-flops too. So I kind of got line crazy adding the stitch work on all of the pieces. I always say a little bit of paint makes a big difference, but on this one, a little bit of line work made a big difference. After I put all the dashes in, I decided that it would be cute to have a couple little stitch lines in between some of the dashes, so I did speed this up so you wouldn't have to watch me make every little dash, but I did go in and add a couple double dashes, and it just helps break up that linear edge and to me, I think it creates a little more playfulness. After I added all of the other detail in, I was thinking that the sandy area looked a little bit plain. So I went back with my splatter brush and kind of covered up the wave edges a little bit. In the instructions, I do this before I paint the water in there, so it makes a little more sense. But I wanted it to look kind of like bubbles of, or grains of sand. So I sprayed it a little bit with my distress sprayer, gave it a quick dry, and then I went in and blotted the heaviness out so that all is left is just a lot of texture. The edge of the wave just needed to be softened up a little bit, and I floated some Bahama Blue along that edge just to help blend it into the water as it's flowing up. These are the little touches that do make a big difference. Highlight the sunglass polka dots with a dip dot of Snow White. It just like it brightens it up and it really makes it glow. Decided the letters also needed the dip dot and stitch lines. I did position everything and glue it in place with Aleene's tacky glue, and I think it just turned out fantastic. I love the wave motion. I love all the sand texture, the polka dot. It just turned out to be a really fun summer beachy door hanger. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you see, please hit the bell and subscribe. That way you won't miss out on upcoming videos. I hope you picked up some new techniques, tips to make your painting life a little easier and a lot more fun. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to our next painting adventure together. And remember, a little bit of paint makes a big difference.